Hello and welcome. My name is Jessie Lee Ryan, and this is a presentation that I did for my company for Transgender Awareness Week. It was so well received that I thought I would put myself out there and post it online. Commenters, please don't make me regret my decision. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss issues around trans and non-binary genders and to educate you on the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is held on November 20th every year. My hope is that some of you may be able to use this information to affect corporate culture change in your own workplaces. Trigger warning. We will be discussing victims of hate crimes, violence, and suicide. If you are sensitive to those topics, please use your discretion in attending this discussion. So what is the Transgender Day of Remembrance, or TDOR as it's often abbreviated? This is an annual day where we remember all transgender and non-binary people who are no longer with us, whether they be lost to hate, violence, or suicide, and we recognize those who are suffering from the immense hardships of systemic oppression. This topic means a lot to me because my wife of 18 years is a transgender woman. I worry about her every time she goes out for a jog, goes to the grocery store, when she travels to unfamiliar places, and whether she will face discrimination at work. But even within the transgender community, my wife enjoys great privilege. She is white, she is employed, and she has enough financial security that she doesn't need to worry about stable housing or meeting her basic needs. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the majority of transgender individuals. There is no denying that trans people of color and those who are financially insecure are the most at risk for becoming victims of violence and discrimination. Before we discuss the importance of this day, I feel like we need to take a step back and look at what being trans and non-binary means. I think the best place to start is by discussing what gender identity means and how here are a few important definitions. A transgender person generally refers to someone who identifies as a gender different from that which they were assigned at birth, based on their sex organs. A non-binary person also falls under the definition of transgender, but is often used for those who are on the gender spectrum who don't identify as all male or all female. For the purposes of simplicity, I will commonly refer to the term trans, but that is an umbrella term including all non-binary genders. So moving on to this diagram, we will discuss some basic biology. Sex refers to your biological sex. What parts do you have? Male, female, or some combination of intersex? Attraction refers to romantic attraction. Are you romantically attracted to people of your same sex, opposite sex, both, or all genders? Identity is the gender encoded in your brain, masculine, feminine, or something in between. Expression refers to your outer presentation. How do you dress and present yourself? Again, this can be masculine, feminine, or something in between. It's important that all of these things, sex, attraction, identity, and expression, are spectrums. While many people may be all of one thing or another, others fall somewhere in the middle. It should also be noted that other than a person's outer expression, they don't choose where they fall. A person does not choose to be transgender. Their choice is whether to transition socially, medically, legally, or not at all. Studies have shown that a person's biological sex and gender identity are fixed while they're still in the womb. About 7 weeks into fetal development, some hormones are released that cause the development of the sex organs. In a separate process later in the fetal development, the brain grows. A second set of hormones encode the gender of the brain. Most of the time, these two sets of hormones match. A fetus with female sex organs will have a female-coded brain. But because the human body is a wonder, sometimes these hormone processes don't match, causing the baby to appear one sex at birth, but as they grow, they feel like they're a different gender in their brain. It's interesting to note that this difference in brains between the genders is observable. Female-coded brains are physically different from male-coded brains. When a transgender person is autopsied upon death, their brain will appear like their identifying gender. So if there's one thing I'd like everyone to take away from this presentation today, it's this. Because there is a biological reason for why this happens, being trans is not a mental disorder, rather a natural biological process. Transitioning gender is a deeply personal thing and can mean different things to different people. There's no one way to transition. Some people do a social transition, which usually means changing the outward expression of their gender through clothes, hair, and makeup. They may change their name and pronouns also. A medical transition usually involves some combination of hormone therapies. The body usually responds to hormone treatments by redistributing fat, producing a more feminine or masculine appearance, and changes to the secondary sex characteristics, such as hair changes and breast growth, etc. Some people opt for surgery to make significant changes. The topic of surgeries can be sensitive, as many trans people are not able to afford them, and many healthcare plans in the United States do not provide coverage under the false belief that these surgeries are cosmetic. We see this as slowly changing, though. Both the AMA and the APA have determined that surgeries are often medically necessary based on the patient's condition. Many physicians with experience treating transgender patients are putting pressure on health insurance carriers to cover them. Some employers are also writing coverage for transition-related procedures to be included in their group health insurance policies. Lastly, people can opt for a legal transition, which entails going to court to change their name and gender markers. Once the court approves, they then, in most states, can amend their gender on their driver's licenses, passports, and social security records. And in many states, they can alter their birth certificates. Natural process or not, trans and non-binary people are often misunderstood or outright despised by people in society. This resentment against them can lead to teasing, verbal insults, and physical or sexual violence. From 2008 to 2019, approximately 3,314 trans or gender diverse individuals were murdered because of or in part because of their gender. I say approximately because it's very hard to track these crimes. The real numbers are likely to be much higher. Organizations such as the Human Rights Campaign and Trans Murder Monitoring do their best to track these fatalities. But the victims are often misgendered in the news, in obituaries, and sadly by their families, making it very hard to collect data. Because over half of those killed are from marginalized communities, the poor, people of color, immigrants, and sex workers, these stories often don't even make the news. In addition to fatalities, here are some other violent crime figures. Nearly half of respondents were verbally harassed in the past year because of being transgender. Nearly 1 in 10 respondents were physically attacked in the past year. Nearly half of the respondents were sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime, and nearly 1 in 10 were sexually assaulted within the past year. In communities of color, these numbers are higher. 53% of Black respondents were sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and 13% were sexually assaulted within the past year. More than half experience some form of intimate partner violence, including acts involving coercive control and physical harm. Sadly, physical harm against trans individuals doesn't always come from others. The suicide rate in the trans community is alarmingly high. Those who are most at risk are those who lack family support or are pre-transition. Approximately 67% of people pre-transition considered suicide, with 41% making an actual attempt. Once transition occurs, these numbers drop to about 3% considering suicide and less than 2% attempting, which is comparable to the non-trans population. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I tried to find where I read this and was unsuccessful, but I did read that over half of trans individuals who do not have any family support consider suicide. This number also drops to less than 3% when they have family acceptance. So you can see how devastating it must feel for those who are unable to transition for whatever reasons or do not have any kind of family support. Moving on to systemic oppression. Recent polling shows that 73% of voters Recent polling shows that 73% of voters support protecting transgender people from discrimination in employment. Despite this strong public support, no federal law in the United States provides explicit legal protections for transgender workers based on their gender identity or expression. And only 17 states and the District of Columbia offer these protections. As a result, transgender workers face higher rates of unemployment and are greatly at risk of poverty. A recent report entitled A Broken Bargain for Transgendered Workers reveals that 14% of transgender workers are unemployed. That's over double the cisgendered population. 44% of those who are currently working are underemployed, meaning they have skills and education that will qualify them for higher job levels, but are just not getting hired. Transgender workers are nearly 4 times more likely than the population as a whole to have an annual household income under $10,000. Think about that. An annual household income of $10,000 or less. 72% of respondents reported having done sex work at some point in their history, and 65% of respondents have experienced homelessness. Some of the issues that trans people face in the workplace are pervasive misunderstanding, hiring bias, and on-the-job discrimination, wage inequities, lack of explicit legal protections, inability to update identity documents, which makes them vulnerable to misgendering, unequal access to health insurance benefits, and denial of personal medical leave. So, what is causing this great disparity for trans people? The answer is lots of systemic oppression. Oppression and systemic, I have a terrible time saying that word, mistreatment, such as racism, classism, sexism, and homophobia, are more than just a sum of people's individual prejudices. It's deeply embedded and often has historical precedent, lending it false credibility and weight. These are rules, norms, and processes created to intentionally disadvantage groups of people based on their identity while advantaging members of the dominant group, whether that be gender, race, class, sexual orientation, etc. It manifests itself in economic, social, political, and cultural systems. Although changing these systems and their effects can be difficult, these systems were created by humans and therefore are able to be undone. Being inclusive is good for business. It's also good for your employees and contributes to the broader good of society. So, how does a company go about tackling systemic oppression in the workplaces? A good place to start is by improving hiring and recruitment practices. Hire on merit, not on how you think someone will be perceived by other employees, vendors, or clients. Unfortunately, across much of the country, it's legal to discriminate against applicants and employees who are transgender. In fact, I live in Arizona, and it's legal to discriminate here. Only 4 Arizona communities, Phoenix, Mesa, Tempe, and Tucson, have local ordinances that prohibit transgender discrimination, and that might only apply to housing discrimination. But just because the law doesn't prohibit employment discrimination against trans people doesn't mean that managers can't be good corporate citizens and set higher standards for their company. It's not enough to say, well, I can't hire diverse candidates if none apply. Review your recruitment efforts. There may be ways to advertise positions in order to reach a broader group of candidates. I belong to an organization called Trans Spectrum of Arizona, which offers peer-to-peer support for people under the trans umbrella and their loved ones. Sometimes we will get companies sending us notices of job fairs or job postings for us to announce at our meetings and post on our social media pages. You could also post on LGBT websites or LGBT community newspapers. If nothing else, you can make diverse hiring a part of the conversation when you're working with outside recruiters. Also, when reviewing resumes of trans individuals, it's nice to keep in mind that it's common to see gaps in employment or see the person worked in jobs below their education level. A lot of this can be explained by systemic oppression, or it's possible that they had to leave hostile work environments without having another position lined up ahead of time. An opportunity for HR departments is to review how trans-related healthcare is covered in their insurance packages. My wife works in employee benefits and finds that companies often don't even think about trans healthcare until they have an employee looking to transition who brings it up to them. One thing employers can do to be proactive is knowing what their policies cover and seeing what coverages can be added. Some other things a company can do are include transgender protection in their non-discrimination policy and enforce it. Create an atmosphere of inclusion. Require managers and employees to address others with their preferred name and pronouns. Encourage all employees to communicate their preferred pronouns on their name tags and email signatures. And set a formal bathroom policy to allow trans employees to use whichever they feel comfortable. Doing these things will improve the morale of your staff, allow you to understand diverse markets, and expand your talent pool. It will also improve your corporate reputation. How can we all contribute to the changing corporate culture? The first is have empathy. My hope is that through this presentation, you gain more of an understanding of gender identity issues, and it will stick with you when you interact with gender diverse individuals going forward. Provide support. Trans and non-binary people have to fight for respect and acceptance every day, and it is exhausting. It's always nice to have outside support. If you hear disparaging comments or jokes made at a trans person's expense, shut it down, or at the very least, report it to a manager. Often, support can simply come from reaching out to a person and making conversation. It helps them to feel accepted and to create a nice working relationship between you. Do your best with pronouns. Of course, you will make mistakes. We all do. I still do. It's fine. Just do your best. When you use a person's preferred pronouns, you validate them as an individual and contribute to their comfort. If you slip up, just correct yourself and move on. Refusal to use preferred pronouns communicates that you are not a safe person, and none of us want that. Know the difference between interest and nosiness. Polite questions about being trans are usually okay, but don't be rude about it. If you're curious and your relationship with the person is close enough, ask them if they are comfortable with you asking questions. But no matter how curious you are, please don't ask about medical issues or surgeries. It's staggering how many times a trans person gets asked what's going on in their pants, and often by strangers. Questions like these are rude and none of anyone's business. A good rule of thumb is to not ask anything you would not ask other coworkers, including specific medical information and about their sex life. Educate yourself. Understand that it isn't a trans person's responsibility to educate everyone they meet about gender issues. I will include some resources on a later slide if you wish to learn more. I also encourage consuming owned voices content. What I mean by that is seek out books, movies, and television shows that were created by trans people for trans people. It's all nice that I'm up here speaking before you today, but I'm not a trans person, and I can only relay information based on my research and what I've witnessed with my wife, my best friend, and my gender diverse social group. We started this presentation by introducing the Transgender Day of Remembrance, so I will end there. The Transgender Day of Remembrance started as a vigil held after the murder of a trans woman, Rita Hester, in 1998. Since then, annual vigils have been held in cities all over the world to remember those lost. Because of the pandemic, many of these vigils are being held in alternate ways online and through presentations like this one. It's an opportunity for communities to come together, remember those who have died or are currently suffering, and raise awareness about the persistent stigma and discriminations trans individuals experience. I hope you will all keep these victims in your hearts. As promised, here's a list of resources to assist you in learning more. These are also a lot of the resources that I used when I was putting together this presentation. And here are some good books for parents who want to teach their children about gender issues. The last one there, Who Are You? A Kid's Guide to Gender Identity, I'm told is very good for children who are exploring their own gender. Thank you for attending this presentation today. Again, I'm putting myself out there by posting this, so I ask that any commenters be respectful. If you have a question for me personally, I can be found on all the major socials under the name Jessie Lee Ryan. I will also monitor the comments here for a few days and try to respond to questions. Thanks again, wear your mask, and stay safe.